Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet. Welcome to episode 33 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. I'm so pleased to have Mr Gareth Brown with me today. Gareth has a wide history in enterprise excellence, working for and leading organisation transformation journeys to award-winning results. Gareth is passionate about helping organisations establish continuous improvement and development in leadership, process, and results. Let's get into the episode. Gareth, thanks so much for joining us today, mate.
You're welcome.
Gareth, do you mind sharing some of your backstory, mate? What sort of moments really shaped you into this path of being involved in enterprise excellence and continuous improvement?
Look, I think it probably started when I was in the Air Force, to be honest. So I had some time working with the RAF. I was in an engineering airworthiness role. Basically, responsibility for keeping aircraft in the air and keeping aging aircraft in the air. And that necessarily involved a lot of moving pieces working well. So obviously you've got to have good people. You need to have rigorous processes. You need to have good data and information and decision making. And I think that's probably where I first came across, if you like, complex systems of, if you like, managing an outcome, if you like, where it's got multiple moving pieces to it. And so it really started there. But it was only really when I left the Air Force into a company called Autoliv, which is now the world's biggest restraint system company, where they had very mature systems of TPS-based operational excellence. And so I translated that engineering kind of thinking into what I guess most people today recognise as lean or TPS.
Gareth, what did you find, mate? Like, a lot of our listeners will know of Autoliv. It's quite revered in relation to having that culture of continuous improvement. What did you find when you joined them was different? And what did you also find, mate, helped you from your learnings at the RAF to bring across there?
Well, there was a lot that was different culturally, a huge amount. It was a really big change for me to go from a military style of leadership, a relatively, if you like, directive style of leadership with very disciplined people and that style of that kind of environment, to Autoliv, which was a Swedish-based company, very collaborative in its leadership style, very egalitarian, didn't have very, very flat organisational structure, quite different decision-making processes. And so culturally, it was a huge change for me, massive change. And it took me several years to, probably make that adjustment. And some would say I perhaps haven't even fully made that adjustment. But some of the things that were different, some of the things that were the same in my first role there, I had a transformation role almost, immediately. And I had the opportunity to kind of take this kind of theory that I'd learned in this airworthiness environment about people and process and data, and plug that into a transformational opportunity. And I was just fairly fortunate that approach happened to work with that first transformational role that I had.
Well, mate, what did you find with that people, process, and data, mate? Like, what were the key elements of that framework that you brought in there and actually brought into play at Autoliv that you'd learned from the Air Force?
Well, I tend to see it as, again, like, a bit like people, process, data. But, if you don't know how you're actually performing, then it's very, very difficult to engage in the problem, right? So you need to be able to put the problem or the opportunity up in lights. So that's the first thing. I think we're all fairly, comfortable with the idea of processes driving those particular outcomes. So then you kind of go, okay, I want good outcomes. I'm going to have to get some processes that are working pretty well. But frankly, you won't get that process improvement unless you've got the people thinking the right way. And so you've got to have the right cultural mindset in order to engage with the processes, to get the results, bring the processes, the results up in lights, And then it becomes this bit of a virtuous kind of circle, if you like. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It's brilliant. So really you're saying, mate, without having the people on board and them engaged and culturally in it, really the process improvement to get the results is not going to work.
I think so. Look, I think in a sustainable way, yes. I mean, you can slam through process change. And I have seen, a number of successful examples of where that happens, where literally, you kind of wrench an organisational process change in place, and that will work. But I think if you're trying to develop a sustainable engine of improvement where you're trying to have an engine that will last a long period of time and is across all aspects of the business, then you can't just take that slam it through approach. Like you've got to bring the people along on the journey with you.
And it sounds easy, but it isn't it? And I know, mate, you were recognised for this approach at VistaPrint, where you led that site in Melbourne, and you actually won a Shingo prize, which sort of recognises this type of approach you're talking about, doesn't it? How did you go about that, mate? Like, how did you go about there at VistaPrint, actually embedding the concept of people, process, and then getting performance and results?
Look, we were quite fortunate at VistaPrint because we had a greenfield opportunity, and I know that not everybody gets that, and in fact, I tend to think that a greenfield opportunity is a once, maybe twice in a lifetime, or once or twice in a career opportunity. So we had this opportunity to start from a clean sheet of paper and put those things in place. I knew that the people side of things was pretty important, and even before we turned the first machine on at VistaPrint, we had discussions with the team about what does good look like, what kind of organisation do we want, and myself and a few of the other leaders there who'd been brought in as part of the launch team, we actually felt like quite a burden of responsibility with, hey, you're given a greenfield opportunity, you can either do a good job with it or you can muck it up. And so we felt this responsibility. And before we started, we had some discussions with the team about the kind of culture that they wanted. What does good look like? And I'd heard somebody in a conference a couple of years before, in an organisational development conference that went through a very, very similar approach. And he took this approach of, he said to his team, he said, imagine in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and you're at a barbecue and you're explaining to your friends and family, hey, I work for this great company. It's, it's really empowering and we get, all these amazing things done and I love working there. What would need to happen in order for you to say that? And literally, we were just in a bit of a room out the back of this still in construction shed with sticky notes and a whiteboard. And people wrote down the 5 things that they'd need in order to be able to make that kind of statement. And then we put them up on the board and grouped them all up, had a discussion about them, and effectively settled on a cultural equation, if you like, or a set of, you could call it a set of values that would underpin, the way that we wanted to work. And look, and as a leader, you've got an opportunity to kind of influence that a little bit. So we snuck in continuous improvement in there, but actually 5 out of the 6 elements on this were, straight from the shop floor. So then what it meant was that when we had further conversations, over the next 6 months, you could just literally lean on this and said, hey, we agreed that we wanted to work in this way. It's going to need these kind of, behaviours. And we didn't have to do a lot of correction in that first few months, but there was still some.
Yeah, it sounds powerful, mate. Like right from the get-go of this new greenfield site, you focused on culture and you did it involving everyone. Like that's amazing. It sounds like there was elements of visionary approach there too, mate, where you were getting them to imagine the future when they're at a barbecue. And that was a really neat way you did it.
Well, look, that's straight out, lean thinking, where if you like, you're going from a current state to a future state, and then between the two, you're just trying to map out a series of actions. Now, in this particular case, there were elements of operational excellence that we had learned over 15 years at Autoliv worked really, really well. And I'd seen them work and deployed in a fairly, I wouldn't say simple way, but the way that they'd been built, they were they were very, very easy to transfer somewhere else. Like, it wasn't rocket science at all. And basically on the back of rapport with the people at Autoliv, we said, hey, look, there's a few things that we found have worked really well in other organisations, and we kind of made a bit of a sales pitch for certain things like leader standard work and 5S and things like that, and said, look, this is the way that we want to work. And that first group of people, I mean, they're all new employees. They don't know any different. They've all come from different organisations, and frankly, with a room full of opportunity and not much structure in place, people are looking for something to hang on to, and they're looking for, okay, let's do this, let's get this in place. So it enabled us to put a whole bunch of those fundamental pieces in place very, very quickly, without having to work through like a resistance equation or to work through a change management equation. So like I said, it's a blessing and it's a fortunate thing to be able to involve in a greenfield. Not everybody's got that. Most people have to work through a change management process to get there. But it was certainly helpful to be able to visualise what that long-term equation, and use that as the basis of why are we doing these things.
Gareth, I know, mate, you mentioned the greenfield and the opportunity you had there, but I think it's still really impressive that you and the team focused on culture and brought in culture out of the gate and created a vision for it by talking about that future state. And then also, you rapidly brought in key standards and key systems right from the start. Because if you delayed on that, mate, and left it 2-3 months to bring in those key systems that you knew from Autoliv, what's your thoughts, mate? Do you think you would have got the same results? Like, I think the rapid action you guys took up front was impressive.
Yeah, well, look, to be honest, I'll refer back to my first transformational role in Autoliv. So Autoliv in the manufacturing side had very, very mature processes that had been literally layered up over 15 years and Toyota had invested in them as their kind of like flagship supplier and all sorts of things. But the piece that I was working in was in the crash test centre, and it hadn't been loved in quite the same way, and it had lost its way. And my task at the start was to make some improvements and changes in that area there. And it really was, I had to work through a lot of change management together. And it took about 2.5 to 3 years to make a complete turnaround. So I knew how hard it was, and it was very stressful. I knew how hard it was to change even a relatively small part of your organisation from not working well at all to working quite well. And so going into a greenfield opportunity, we thought, you know what, it's going to be a whole lot easier if we can just get this stuff in at the start, like get people bought into it, get in there so that literally that when everybody else comes on board, because we were going to scale from 30 or 40 people up to 100 people over a 6-month period, that none of those people will really know any different. They'll kind of come in and go, oh, this is the way we work here. I'll assimilate with that. And literally it was born out of the fact that we knew that it was like a stitch in time saves 9. Every hour that we spent on building these foundations right at the start would save us 9 or 10 hours of grief later on. So it was probably laziness that drove it, to be perfectly honest.
I think it's impressive, but mate, and especially too, it makes me reflect on the power of when you onboard people into an organization, even existing, like that moment of a new person joining an organization, whether it be greenfield or existing. That's a moment that's going to shape that person, isn't it? And it's going to shape it quite rapidly.
100%. People generally want to assimilate with the organisation they come in with, and there's lots of case studies of where people have changed from being having their thinking in the right place to really downgrading as a result of the environment they've been in, and they haven't been able to bring in enough critical mass to make the change here. And so that opportunity when you bring people in is very, very important. And I think the kind of support that they get during that time and how you manage that process is very, very important. And look, I would say that it's an opportunity that goes often unrecognised in a lot of organisations. Like we think, you go through all this recruiting process, and often those recruiting processes are fairly painful. By the time you get them there, you've run your race. I think we underestimate the importance of really investing in that person as a leader at the start to make sure that they're part of the team and they understand where you want them to think differently as well as where you'd like them to subscribe to the existing paradigms.
It's a real opportune time to save yourself a lot of time down the track, like you said. That was a great point. Mate, what advice would you give to a new leader or someone looking to come into play with a transformation journey, and they're just getting into it? Same as you got some advice early on in your career, mate, and throughout your journey. What would you say if you were talking to someone just getting going right now?
I reckon one of the best pieces of advice that I got was actually I can't remember the guy that spoke this. It was a Japanese gentleman who'd worked on Toichi Ono's team. He was, he was in Australia as part of a conference would have been early 2000s. And somebody from the audience asked a question. They asked almost exactly that same question. They said, what's the recipe for success? What are the key things that you really need to know? And this guy came straight out and he said, the number one thing that you need is top management support. He said, you must have top management support. Without that, you're either really going to struggle or you're not going to succeed. And I think that's true. You really, really have to have that senior leader sponsor who's going to go on the journey with you and is going to support you and who has that vision of where they want to go. And look, I really feel for people in operational excellence roles who don't have that. And I actually couldn't operate in that way. Like if I didn't have a senior leader support, I literally would just move company, because you are just going to flog yourself, and you're probably going to become a bit demoralised and a bit jaded and a bit cynical, and quite likely not even achieve your results because your senior leader is going to have different imperatives that they're going to want to put first.
So, Gareth, you're saying that what happens in that scenario, if you don't have their support, you're trying to lead through excellence and help achieve that, but imperatives of those leaders is disrupting it or causing damage.
Yeah, because they will get the first. Because people invest time where in the things that their bosses value. You can see what your boss values because that's where he spends his time or her time, right? So if your boss is doing A, B, and C, and you're trying to say, hey, I want you to invest in D, they're not going to listen to you. Because most operational excellence people don't carry significant authority. I don't carry authority now. What I bring to the organisation is influence, if you like. But fundamentally, it's those line leaders that carry the authority. If the line leaders are saying other things to what you're saying, then you're not going to get a lot of traction.
Yeah. And is there any tactics or anything, mate, that you've found or seen people do or used yourself to help influence senior leaders and get buy-in and get that commitment?
Look, I haven't got any secret sauce for this, other than if there's any way that you can get those leaders to other organisations which are already employing some of these principles and are on the journey, and that will cause them to, for their eyes to light up. So if you've got to try and create that vision for them through somewhere else, because you standing up and making presentations and showing photos and stuff like that, it's going to sound like a completely foreign language to them. And they're going to go, okay, I don't see how it's going to really apply here. That's this kind of business. We're this kind of business and we're very different. They need to go and see a business where it's already running, it's already reasonably mature, and they're getting genuine business benefit out of it, and see the enthusiasm in those front and second line leaders' eyes when they talk about this improvement that they're in, and they're taking pride in their results. And if you can show them that, particularly if it's in an industry which is not too different to what they're involved in, they can say, I can make that leap. There's got similarities between what they're doing and what I'm doing. Then that's probably the best option that you've got.
Yeah, that's great advice. Taking them to see and physically visualize it for themselves as someone who's doing it well already. That's powerful. What are you focused on now going forward, mate?
I'm working in an organisation called GrainCorp. It's a leading Australian agribusiness. We've got hundreds of sites up the east coast of Australia. We manage, I think, about half of the east coast Australian grain. So that's moving it. So basically receiving it in, moving it through rail systems to port, export, and then also domestic consumption as well. It's quite a complicated equation. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of variables. There's a long history with the business, but quite a a disparate history. Like all those states, we didn't all start with GrainCorp 130 years ago. They've all come from various states and things. And right now we're focused on putting in place some of the fundamental pieces that you need to succeed, and particularly developing those tier 1 to tier 3 leaders. So I've got really good sponsorship at a senior level, but we're effectively it's like selling a different language to people. Unlike a lot of manufacturing industries where people have come from other manufacturing industries and they kind of go, oh yeah, I kind of recognise that. We did this at so-and-so business. Where we're working in the agribusiness sector, a lot of the stuff is completely foreign. They haven't seen this at all. And so you're literally going right back to square one about selling the benefits of these fundamental pieces. The challenge for us is really around the scale of it. We're a very, very small team, and we've got a large number of people that we're trying to develop over a very wide geographic area. And they're very small teams. It's almost a bit like a utility, if you like. And so to develop those leaders and to introduce those systems requires a certain creativity, and it requires a slightly different approach, if you like, to get traction in that environment. And these people are by and large, they're very practical people. They'll call BS very, very quickly, but that's probably not unusual in an Australian environment. And so you've got to be able to put things on the table which offer value for them. Like there's got to be you've got to think about that what's in it for me equation. So we've got a business kind of context and things that we're trying to do, but what we put on the table has to give them pretty much immediate benefit. They've got to be thinking, hey, that actually makes my life easier.
Yeah. And mate, it's so good that you're involved in agricultural industry and one of our largest, if not our largest, because Australia, so much of Australia is agricultural and primary industry. So mate, it's a real blessing that we've got yourself in that industry right now and then helping. It sounds like it's a good journey to be on.
Yeah, look, I enjoyed it. I mean, I've worked in a number of industries over the years. I mean, I really loved being in the Air Force, and you felt like you're part of a bigger thing. I loved working for Autoliv because it's fundamentally it's an organisation that's there to save people's lives. I've worked in other industries since where the meaning side of it wasn't as strong, and I struggled to kind of really buy into it. But agribusiness and feeding the world, we've brought in, in our harvest, we've brought in like 13 million tonnes of grain. That's like enough to fill the MCG 13 times. That's a lot of loaves of bread, and that gets exported all over the world.
Yeah, there's a big purpose behind that. And for those that don't know, GrainCorp is a major player about the world, not just Australia when it comes to size, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got operations in Europe, in Canada, into Asia. So it's genuinely in the UK. So it's a global organisation. I tend to spend most of my time in the east coast of Australia, but we've got international operations as well.
Hey, Gareth, one question I always finish up with guests, mate, is what have you learnt recently in your area of expertise that you didn't know before? What's been a recent insight for you?
I think probably a recent, there's probably, I would say, two recent insights, one which I'll gloss over fairly quickly, and the second one which we can unpack if you want to. The first one would probably be the value of value stream mapping for organisations that are less versed in operational excellence. I hadn't used value stream mapping very much at all in fact, I don't think we did even once at either Autoliv or VistaPrint, because we had very mature processes and teams, and literally the waste stood out very, very quickly. Everybody could see where it was. And so you didn't need to kind of unpack it exhaustively to be able to put it on the table. But since leaving there, I've discovered the benefit of mapping processes out and making it visual and bringing the group along with us. The second piece would probably be the benefits of some of the digital, translating those lean tools, which have traditionally been in a fairly tactile kind of deployment, and making them digital. And there's lots of people today who are actually more comfortable with a digital interface than a tactile. And I've got stories I could tell another day of people, particularly younger people, being quite disorientated by your sticky notes and writing stuff on a pen and your reds and greens and stuff. And they kind of go, that's really weird. But you do the same thing on a computer. Oh, great. No, I'm all over it. That sounds great.
Yeah, Gareth, I found the same, mate. And I think prior to COVID, mate, did you avoid it? prior to COVID, were you sort of thinking, oh, the tactile is the way to go? And then has COVID really opened your eyes? Because I tell you, mate, I've been through that journey.
Yeah. And look, it happened to come at the right time for us because, like I said, we've got this real tyranny of geography and we have a real problem with being able to get across all of those folks. So one of my guys who works in the country area, literally for him to deploy one small system and spend 3 hours with each of those teams, that's a 12-week program for him traveling nonstop. That's just to move one tiny piece to get in front of people once. Now, that doesn't, align with very much lean thinking at all. That whole lean thinking of walk beside people and, we go and we see and we teach and we coach and stuff. Trying to do that with this kind of geography is very, very difficult. So we're seeing benefits of digitizing a lot of this thinking. We've had to think very carefully about how do you make that digital expression of that lean concept very, very simple. Because the flip side of this equation is a lot of our folks are a bit twitchy about tech, or they're not particularly comfortable with tech. Some of our, maybe our older generation people. And so we have to create tools which are so intuitive, but in a digital environment, that's what we've been focusing on as a particular challenge. So that's been a bit of a learning over the last year or two.
Well, I think we've got another episode there if you're willing to come back on at some stage, because I think we could just talk for a whole half hour on that one, mate. If you'd be open to it at some stage, let's set that up. I think our listeners would gain a heap from it.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. It's something that's exciting me more than I thought it would. We've got some really good learnings that I'm happy to share with you anytime.
Great, mate. Gareth, how can people reach out to you, mate, if they want to get in touch?
Oh, just find me on LinkedIn. I think my details are all on there, so give me a buzz. I'm pretty happy to talk anyone's ear off. If they got a particular challenge and they're saying, hey, do you mind if I bounce a few ideas off you? Then yeah, look, I'm very happy to do that.
Well, Gareth, thank you, mate. Thanks for your knowledge and everything you're doing and everything you're working on now with such a key company in GrainCorp. And mate, thanks for helping us create that better future. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Brad. Good luck with the rest of the series.
Thanks, mate. Bye for now.
The key takeaway for me from this episode was the focus Gareth had on people, process, and performance. Gareth really outlined the importance of getting people on the journey and culturally engaged first. Without motivation to change and adopt new things, there is very little chance of team members engaging and supporting the journey. Emotion, either positive or negative, helps people embrace and lock away new learning, form new habits. When new people join an organisation, they naturally have a high level of emotion and desire to fit in. This is a prime time to achieve cultural and system alignment with people. If you have a greenfield site opportunity, plan up front and focus on the most important things first, like Gareth and his team did. If you don't have that opportunity, review your new team member onboarding process. How can you improve this system to engage new employees early, align them to the culture and system improvement approach you are looking to achieve in the future? Thanks again for your time and knowledge, Gareth, and helping us create a better future. Bye for now.